Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who admit they need a moment to break. But that moment of recognition was still months away. Waiting in a ballroom, Sarah Martinez would enter through the service door. There exists a peculiar blindness that afflicts those who climb high enough to forget the ground beneath them. They stop seeing the hands that steady their ladders, the shoulders that bear their burdens, the quiet souls who ensure their worlds run smoothly while they sleep. This blindness isn't merely cruel, it's a kind of voluntary darkness, chosen and cultivated, until the very people who hold up their kingdoms become invisible. But invisibility, as Sarah Martinez knew, could also be a kind of superpower. When no one sees you, you're free to be exactly who you are. The law offices of Morrison, Chen, and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower that scraped the belly of winter clouds. At 4 a.m., while the city slept under a blanket of fresh snow, Sarah pushed her cleaning cart through the 40th floor's mahogany corridors. Her fingers, stiff with cold despite her thin jacket, moved with practiced efficiency, emptying waste bins, wiping down conference tables that cost more than her annual salary, vacuuming carpets that would be pristine for approximately 3 hours before the partners arrived with their Italian leather shoes and casual contempt. She'd been cleaning these offices for 3 years, long enough to know which partners left thank-you notes at Christmas David Morrison, though she hadn't seen him in months, and which ones wouldn't notice if she collapsed right in front of them. Long enough to memorize the photos on their desks, the awards on their walls, the casual wealth that dripped from every surface like honey from a spoon. Victoria Chen belonged firmly in the latter category. Sarah heard her before she saw her, the sharp click of heels at 4:47 a.m., unprecedented for a partner who usually arrived at 8. Sarah quickly moved her cart aside, lowering her eyes in the practiced invisibility that had become second nature. She'd learned this dance in a dozen offices before this one, the choreography of erasure that kept her employed and her daughter insured. The coffee spill seemed almost choreographed. Victoria, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing dramatically about some international merger, swept her arm wide just as she passed Sarah's cart. The designer cup, Sarah recognized it from the boutique cafe that charged $18 for a latte, erupted across the Persian rug like a modern art installation. "For God's sake," Victoria hissed, covering her phone's microphone. "Can't you people ever pay attention? This carpet is worth more than you make in 6 months. She didn't wait for an apology, didn't even look at Sarah's face. "Clean it up. And if it stains, it's coming out of your paycheck. I have witnesses. The security cameras will show you were careless with your cart placement." Sarah knelt, pressing paper towels into the spreading brown lake, her knees grinding against the wool fibers. The coffee was still hot enough to burn through her thin latex gloves, but she didn't flinch. Inside her chest, her heart beat a familiar rhythm, not of hurt, but of endurance. She thought of Emma, her 7-year-old daughter, sleeping in their 1-bedroom apartment, her breathing assisted by the inhaler that cost $2, $100 a month even with insurance. She thought of the rice and beans in their pantry, stretched thin until Friday's paycheck. She thought of all the things she'd swallowed, all the words she'd never said, all the dignity she'd traded for survival. "And make sure you use the proper cleaning solution," Victoria added, already walking away. "Not whatever discount product you people usually use. If there's even a shadow of a stain when I come back, you're done here." The coffee came out. It always did. Sarah had become an expert at removing stains from carpets, from walls, from the consciences of people who preferred their cruelty sanitized and their victims silent. She worked meticulously, aware of the security camera overhead, aware that Victoria would review the footage, looking for any excuse to justify what they both knew was an inevitable termination. Victoria had been building a case for months. Documented infractions for being 30 seconds late, for using the wrong floor polish, for existing in a way that reminded Victoria that not everyone was born on third base. By the time Sarah finished, the sun was attempting to rise through the storm clouds, painting the office in shades of gray. She gathered her supplies, checked the carpet one more time, perfect of course, and headed to the service elevator. Her shift would end in 15 minutes. Emma would be waking up soon, needing her inhaler, needing breakfast, needing her mother's smile to start the day right. By the time Sarah finished her shift at 5 a.m., the storm had transformed from picturesque to brutal. Wind howled between the buildings like a living thing, driving snow horizontal, turning the city into a blur of white violence. Sarah pulled her thin jacket tighter refined from Goodwill, 2 sizes too big, but the warmest thing she owned, and headed for the service entrance. The loading dock was a wind tunnel, funneling the storm's fury into a concentrated blast that could knock a person sideways. Sarah put her head down and pushed forward, thinking about the bus stop 3 blocks away, the heated shelter that sometimes worked, the 40-minute ride home if the buses were still running in this weather. He was curled against the loading dock wall, so still she almost mistook him for a pile of discarded cardboard. But something, maybe the particular quality of his stillness, maybe the way the snow had begun to bury him like a premature funeral, made her stop. The young man couldn't have been older than 25. His lips had taken on that particular shade of blue that Sarah recognized from the winter her heat got shut off, the winter she'd learned exactly how close the human body could come to shutting down. His clothes, once expensive by the look of the fabric, hung on him like rags. Track marks decorated his arms like a map of wrong turns. His hair, dark and matted, might have once been professionally cut. His face, beneath the dirt and despair, held the ghost of someone who'd been loved. Sarah knelt beside him, her knees sinking into the snow. His pulse fluttered under her fingers, weak, but there. She shook him gently, then harder. His eyes opened briefly, unfocused, pupils dilated. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey, you need to wake up. You can't stay here." He mumbled something incoherent, his body shaking violently. She caught fragments. "Sorry. Can't. Better without," the vocabulary of someone who'd given up. Sarah looked around the empty loading dock, then up at the tower of glass and steel where she'd just spent 8 hours being invisible. She thought of her daughter, waiting at home. She thought of the $40 in her wallet, grocery money, medicine money, the difference between making it and not making it until Friday. She thought of her jacket, the only thing keeping the cold from her bones. She pulled it off anyway. The cold hit her immediately, vicious and personal, like the universe had been waiting for this moment of vulnerability. She wrapped the jacket around the young man's shoulders, then pulled out her phone with numb fingers. Her hands shook so badly she could barely unlock the screen. "I need an Uber to Mercy Hospital," she told the app, watching her bank balance in her mind. "It's an emergency." While she waited, she tried to keep the young man conscious, talking to him about nothing and everything. "You're going to be okay," she said, though she wasn't sure if she was lying. "The hospital's warm. They'll take care of you. You just have to hold on a little longer." The driver, a middle-aged Haitian man named Jean-Pierre, took one look at the situation and helped without hesitation. Together, they got the young man into the car, his body limp as a marionette with cut strings. "This your son?" Jean-Pierre asked. "No," Sarah said, pressing her last 2 20s into his hand, "but he's someone's." "The fare's only 15, Jean-Pierre said, trying to hand 1 bill back. "The extras for waiting while they get him inside," Sarah said. "Please, make sure they take him. Don't let them turn him away." Jean-Pierre nodded solemnly. "You're not coming?" Sarah looked down at her uniform, stained with coffee and snow and the general exhaustion of poverty. "I have someone waiting for me at home." She stood in the loading dock as the car disappeared into the white void of the storm. The walk to the bus stop took 15 minutes. The wait for the bus took 30. By the time she reached her apartment, she couldn't feel her hands, her feet, or most of her face. Her body shook so violently she could barely get the key in the lock. Emma was awake, wheezing slightly, needing her morning inhaler. "Mommy, where's your jacket?" Sarah pulled her daughter close, feeling the warmth of her small body like a benediction. "Someone needed it more, baby." Emma nodded solemnly, the way children do when they recognize a truth too large for words. "Like when we shared our lunch with Mrs. Chen from downstairs?" "Exactly like that." "Was it someone nice?" Sarah thought of the young man's eyes, the flicker of recognition when she'd wrapped the jacket around him, the way his fingers had clutched the fabric like it was the first kind thing he'd touched in months. "I think he used to be," she said. "And maybe he will be again." They ate rice with soy sauce for breakfast. Sarah made it special by adding the last egg, beaten and stirred in until it formed golden threads. Emma declared it delicious, though Sarah noticed she ate slowly, making it last. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the city, but inside their small apartment, warmth had nothing to do with temperature. The Morrison, Chen, and Associates annual gala was the kind of event that made the society pages $500 a plate, proceeds going to a charity that none of the attendees could quite name, held in the Riverside Ballroom with its crystal chandeliers and perfect acoustics. Sarah stood behind the bar in her borrowed server's uniform, invisible in a different way now, pouring champagne for people who looked through her like she was made of glass. She'd been mandated to work the event Victoria Chen's doing, of course. "We need someone who knows the partner's preferences," she'd said, with a smile that never reached her eyes, "and since you're already on the payroll—" The truth was simpler and crueler. Victoria enjoyed having Sarah there to witness her triumph. The announcement would come tonight, Victoria's elevation to senior partner, the youngest in the firm's history. Sarah had cleaned the champagne flutes herself, polished each one until it sang, knowing that her presence here was meant as a reminder of their relative positions in the world's hierarchy. For 3 hours, Sarah served drinks with practiced grace, smiling at people who didn't see her, remembering their usual orders, anticipating their needs before they knew they had them. She'd become expert at this kind of prescient service, the ability to be essential and invisible simultaneously. The collision was minor. Someone bumped Sarah's elbow just as she was turning with a tray of full glasses. 2 flutes wobbled but didn't fall. The champagne sloshed but didn't spill. Any reasonable person would have barely noticed. Victoria Chen was not a reasonable person. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying across the ballroom with practiced authority. "I apologize for the disturbance. This is exactly why certain people never rise above minimum wage. They simply don't possess the grace or awareness required for sophisticated environments." The silence that followed was complete. 500 people in their finest clothes, frozen like a tableau of judgment. Sarah felt their eyes on her, some pitying, some amused, most simply uncomfortable. She set down the tray carefully, her hands steady despite the trembling in her chest. "You know," Victoria continued, warming to her theme, "we try to be charitable, to give opportunities to those less fortunate, but sometimes you have to accept that there are simply different classes of people. Some are meant to serve, and others," she gestured to the room, "are meant to lead." Sarah stood perfectly still, feeling each word like a small cut, the death by 1,000 slices that was her daily experience. She thought of Emma, of the college fund that existed only in dreams, of the better life she'd promised her daughter every night before bed. "You're absolutely right, Ms. Chen." The voice came from the back of the room, deep and measured. David Morrison hadn't attended a firm event in 5 years, not since his son Michael had disappeared into the streets, swallowed by addiction and mental illness. But here he was, standing slowly, his presence commanding attention like gravity. "Sarah Martinez doesn't belong here," he continued, walking toward the front of the room. "She belongs somewhere far better than this." Victoria's smile flickered uncertainty. "David, I didn't know you were—" "I've been here for the last hour," he interrupted, "watching, listening, learning things about my firm that I should have known years ago." He pulled out his phone, connected it to the ballroom's projection system with a few taps. "I want to show everyone something." The video showed security footage from the building's loading dock. The timestamp showed 5:07 a.m., 3 nights ago. The temperature reading in the corner showed 15 degrees. A figure Sarah was removing her only jacket, wrapping it around a young man collapsed against the wall, and calling for help on her phone. "That young man," David's voice broke completely now, "is my son Michael. He's been missing for 2 years. 2 years of private investigators, false leads, nights spent wondering if he was alive or dead. Sarah didn't know who he was to her. He was just a human being freezing to death. She gave him her only jacket. She used her last $40 to get him to the hospital. She saved his life. He turned to face Sarah directly for the first time. The same woman you just humiliated saved my son's life 3 nights ago, with no thought of reward, recognition, or even thanks. Victoria Chen stood frozen, her champagne glass trembling slightly. Around her, other employees began to step forward, a junior associate mentioning how Sarah had stayed late to help her find a lost engagement ring, a security guard describing how she'd brought him soup when his wife was in the hospital, a custodian sharing how she'd covered his shifts when his daughter was sick. "I've been investigating something else," David continued, his voice hardening. "The systematic harassment of support staff, particularly by certain partners who seem to believe that cruelty is a management style." His eyes found Victoria. "Your partnership review has been postponed indefinitely. I suggest you use the time to reflect on what real grace looks like. HR will be conducting interviews with all support staff starting Monday." The ballroom erupted, not in applause, which would have been too Hollywood, but in a low murmur of recognition, of pieces falling into place, of 100 small cruelties suddenly seen in aggregate. But David wasn't finished. "There's more," he said quietly, and the room fell silent again. "Michael is here tonight. He asked to come. He wanted to meet the woman who saw him as human when the world had written him off." A young man entered from the side door, thin but clean, shaky but standing, his eyes clear for the first time in years. He walked directly to Sarah, stopped a respectful distance away. In his hands, he held a jacket. Her jacket, cleaned and mended. "The nurse said you called 3 times to check on me," Michael said simply. "Never left your name. Just wanted to know if the young man from the loading dock was okay." His voice grew stronger. "I haven't been okay in a very long time." But that morning, wrapped in your jacket, knowing a stranger cared enough to give up something she needed, it was the first time in 2 years I thought maybe I could be. He held out the jacket. "I wanted to return this." Sarah shook her head. "Keep it." For the next cold night. "There won't be any more cold nights," Michael said. "I'm in treatment. Real treatment this time. And when I get out, I'm going to volunteer at the shelter, help people the way you helped me. Show them that even when you're invisible, someone sees you." David cleared his throat. "Sarah, I've taken the liberty of enrolling you in our paralegal certification program. Full scholarship, flexible hours to accommodate your schedule, and a guaranteed position when you graduate. It's not charity. It's an investment in someone who's already proven their worth 1,000 times over. Additionally," he continued, "effective immediately, you'll receive a settlement for the hostile work environment you've endured. Victoria's personal assets will cover it. She's agreed to this to avoid litigation. It should be enough to ensure Emma never goes without her medication again." Sarah's legs nearly gave out. Someone she never saw who pushed a chair behind her. She sat, overwhelmed, as the reality of what was happening slowly penetrated the armor she'd built around her heart. "Thank you," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion, "for everything. I hope someday I can be the kind of person who does what you did." Sarah looked at this young man who'd been lost and found, who wore his scars like maps of survival. "You already are," she said softly. "You chose to live." A small, fragile smile touched Michael's lips. He nodded, then stepped back to stand with his father. As the ballroom began to buzz with conversation, David gently touched Sarah's arm. "Can we speak for a moment? Privately." He led her to a quiet corner near the windows, away from the crowd. He seemed to be searching for words. "There's something else," he said, his voice softer now. "The video of you helping my son. It wasn't the first time I'd seen you show that kind of kindness." Sarah looked at him confused. 6 months ago," he continued, "I was having a panic attack in the parking garage. Right around 2 a.m. I was paralyzed by grief over Michael. I thought I was completely alone." He paused, meeting her eyes. "But I wasn't." A cleaner came by. "She didn't know who I was." She just saw a man falling apart. She knelt with me, talked me through it, stayed until I could stand. She told me that sometimes the strongest people are the ones who admit they need a moment to break. Sarah's breath caught as the memory surfaced. A man in a suit, crumpled against a pillar. She'd thought he was having a heart attack. "That was you," David said simply. "You saved me that night, Sarah. You gave me the strength to keep searching for my son. The same woman who saved my son from freezing to death also saved me from drowning in despair. I needed you to know." Victoria Chen left the gala early, her empire of cruelty crumbling one ignored human being at a time. Within a month, she would quietly resign, her reputation in tatters. The staff she'd terrorized would slowly begin to speak, to stand taller, to remember that they were human beings deserving of dignity. David Morrison was home for the first time in 5 years, really home, with his son under the same roof. They talked late into the nights, rebuilding what addiction had stolen, finding their way back to each other one conversation at a time. And Sarah? Sarah enrolled in night classes while Emma did homework beside her. They studied together, mother and daughter, building a future that had once seemed impossible. Sometimes David would stop by her new desk at the firm, bringing her a coffee and asking about her classes. He became a quiet mentor, a steady presence who checked in on her and Emma, ensuring they had everything they needed. They were an unlikely friendship, bound by the understanding that kindness given in darkness can change everything. 6 months later, at Sarah's paralegal certification ceremony, Emma gave a speech about heroes. "My mom taught me that heroes don't wear capes," she said, her voice clear and strong, no wheeze in her breathing. "They wear old jackets and give them away. They work night shifts and still help with homework. They see people who are invisible and remind them they matter." In the front row, David Morrison watched, a proud smile on his face. Beside him, Michael was a picture of health and hope. David caught Sarah's eye and gave a small, affirming nod. They'd learned the same lesson Sarah had always known, that kindness given in our darkest hour, when no one is watching and we have nothing to spare, creates light we may never see, but it finds its way home. It always finds its way home.